Who Watches the Rewatchers, a Buffy rewatch podcast.
Yeah. She's very funny. My favorite interaction with her was she asked me at some point about something. I don't remember what it was. And I was trying to explain something. It was related to animation, And sometimes when I start talking animation, it's a little wacky because, you can do all kinds of weird stuff with that in terms of like code or interpolation or all kinds of bizarre ideas. And at some point in the middle of my explanation, she goes, yeah, that's what you sound like right now. I was just so amused by that.
Thank you. That's all right. You ready to go?
I'm ready to go, man.
All right. Greetings. Welcome to Who Watches the Rewatchers, a podcast where we rewatch, my friend Alan and I do, rewatch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And today is a special day. We are on episode 12 of season 1. That is the ultimate episode of the first season. It is called Prophecy Girl. And how are you doing, Alan?
Man, I'm doing great. It's a rainy day out here, but everything's going smoothly in my life at the moment, at least for right now. So it'll probably fall apart tomorrow.
But don't be like that. Don't be that guy. No, it's great. You got to watch Buffy. I mean, it's always a good thing.
Yeah, that's true.
And finally, we got to this episode. We're going to deal with the Master. So these are the episodes that are kind of putting the mythology together in the first season of Buffy. And I actually really like this one. This is where we're gonna, I think there's some nice character arc stuff happening in this first episode, and including one of my favorite bits about Xander actually getting the gall or the nerve to ask Buffy out on a date after all season pining for her, which I was kind of proud of him rewatching that. Looking back on my teenage life, I was proud of his, of his gutsiness.
And after seeing Willow pine for Xander the entire time, to see her reaction to that was also kind of refreshing.
Heck yeah, man. I'm not going to go to the dance with you. She's, you're looking after some other girl the whole time. I love that. Yeah. So let's get into the story and think about Prophecy Girl.
Absolutely. So we start off with the Master and the Anointed One.
Yeah, the little boy who is not able to, he is not trapped at the gate of the Hellmouth. The Master is. We've already kind of commented before on some of the effects, but he's there in this mystical kind of cell, and we got the Master and the Anointed One in their pseudo kind of upside down version of Christianity stuff happening.
Yep.
But there is an earthquake that happens all over town, right? There's an earthquake that shakes everyone on top of the mouth in Sunnydale, and so people were wondering, well, what's going on? When I first watched it, I actually didn't even think about the Hellmouth. That was so silly. I just kind of thought Southern California, sure thing.
Yeah. Right.
Buffy and Giles are in the library, and Buffy comes in, and Giles has clearly been there all night long. He has been obsessed with what he's been reading. That codex we talked about from last time. This book that Angel happened to have that Giles wanted, which has more information about the Slayer. And so he's been reading it, and he's troubled all night because ultimately it says that the Slayer is going to die at the hands of the Master.
Right.
And so she sees Giles all disheveled, and she sees also certain areas of the library itself are in particular disarray, or they're particularly broken. They look unstable and unsafe and structurally. And she points that out to Giles, and he's just he's aloof, not because he's aloof, but because he's worried, right?
That's right.
And she starts off, the night before having killed 3 vamps, and I thought in a particularly cool way. They set it up really cool because Cordelia's making out with a guy in a car, and their windows are fogged, so they don't know what's going on outside. Meanwhile, Buffy is totally kicking tail,
right?
And she thinks Giles will be so proud of her. It's three hunts in one night, But he's distant, and she doesn't know why, and it's perfect teen angsty kind of stuff happening, all in the library. Where
And I think that what they're doing there is that whole reflection of Buffy is trying to make her way through life, and she feels all this oppression, and meanwhile she feels like everyone around her has an easy time of it. And I think that's what that thing with Cordelia is supposed to be, not this piece,
Absolutely, yeah. Some people get to live a normal life, not the Slayer. which I think is also just a metaphor for leaders a lot of times. But
Yes.
well, Jenny Calendar shows back up. Giles. I always want Giles to be happy. That's all I'm saying.
I agree, man. I hear you.
She shows up in the study there, and you know, and she's like warning him of all the signs, including the way they do that, Alan, is funny to me. It's like she's like, there was a worldwide message sent out on the data boards, or or whatever, like the way they talked internet speak back then, and like messaging. It's just funny because it just shows how far we've come. Like there's a prophet somewhere who's put out a worldwide message. Not the way we think anymore.
No, not in any way. So,
but she's got all these apocalyptic signs.
My favorite sign, of course, was the litter of snakes coming out of the cat.
Yeah, I know. I saw it. I was thinking of Ghostbusters, the first Ghostbusters. They talked about basically all the worst parts of the Bible, and Bill Murray says dogs and cats living together.
Mass hysteria.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. This guy, and it's also a monk. Brother Luke is the guy who sent out this email, this worldwide blast about the Anointed One. Apparently, there's this. If only the internet were full of people who actually knew real things to share instead of, Pizzagate and evil cabals and conspiracy theories.
But back then we were so hopeful.
Giles, he asked for more information. We'll explain things later, blah, blah, blah. Now we cut to Xander's going to ask Buffy out. He knows that she likes Angel, and he does have a moment where he sits down with her and he valiantly tries to be honest. And I thought they played that really well. And her response when he asked her was, "What didn't she say? Like, I don't know how you want me to answer that."
Yeah, she says, "I don't know what to say right now."
Yeah, and I mean that's the answer, but. She's not Valley Girl Buffy that people might have thought of the show. She's substantive and caring.
Well, I mean, Valley Girl Buffy was the movie,
right?
And I think that's the impression. I went and saw the movie. I thought it was hilarious when I saw it, but definitely like a throwaway kind of thing. And so for this character to be so wildly different from that movie portrayal, I thought I have thought since I started watching it was really interesting. I heard an interview with Sarah Michelle Gellar one time that I was particularly fascinated by. She said that before the show launched, she ran into Kiefer Sutherland at a party, and what she was working on was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and he says, You mean like the movie my dad did? And she goes, no, not like that at all. And she says she ran into him years later, and he apologized and he said, man, was I wrong about that one?
That's a cool story. Of course, he played a vampire in Lost Boys.
That's right.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. That's right.
But but she says, you're one of my best friends, and she really cares, and you can tell, and you can hurt for him, and That's just awkwardness of human relationships, and. He's mad, and they go on, and then he sees his best buddy Willow and says, "Hey, would you go to the dance with me?" And that's the part you mentioned. I mean, proud of her for turning him down. No, why would I do that? And I don't know that he has any notion that she has been in love with him since kindergarten, but
I think he does know.
Does
he knows, and I think that he just tries to ignore it. And I think that that's part of what makes that particular love triangle so interesting. Because Buffy knows Xander's into her, but she tries to ignore it. Xander Willow's into him, and he tries to ignore it. And meanwhile, Willow doesn't have anybody who's into her, but she's like, if she isn't the coolest character of the three of them, I don't know. I think she might be.
I was so in that, but we'll talk about that later when we get
sure.
Okay, so she turns him down. Yeah, so like that evening, we're at school, and it's kind of strange because I don't know if you noticed, but like. She walks by her locker. My memory of this is she walks by her locker or closes her locker, and it's completely dark. It's lit just with a little bit of light on the locker, like really dark in the hallway at school. And I'm like, when has anyone ever been in a school that was like that? You know what I mean? It was just set like a horror film. Like
Right.
Yeah.
Well, she goes, in fairness, I will say that my classrooms look like that.
Okay. All right.
I have a lot of dim lighting because people are at computers and working, and so there you go.
Okay. This is a hallway, but
fair enough. Always, you're right.
So it's nighttime. I guess that's why it's dark. But she goes, she goes in the bathroom, and then in the faucet there's running blood.
Yep.
Which would alarm anybody. But so she runs into the library to go tell Giles, and he just so happens to be with her boy toy, Angel. And they're talking about the prophecy that Giles read in that codex from a couple episodes ago. And in there, he's basically saying she's going to die. And you can hear the anguish. I love it. You can hear the anguish in Giles. Giles is not, he is not utilitarian about his role. And over the series, you find out this whole like culture of watchers and slayers, and the whole system is a thing. Sure. It's an institution that becomes an issue later. But, he's not utilitarian about this at all. And later in this episode, she's like, hey, look, I'll die and another one will come up, right? Like, it's just a system. Like, she even points out, like, she's a real human in a system. Right. But he is not. He cares. He deeply cares. And that's happening. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? Because it's kind of hard.
It is. So I'll give you a moment of levity before I tell you what I really think about the solemnness of that moment. One of my favorite calendar lines is, tell me again how Buffy's the Vampire Slayer? She's so little. I thought I always enjoyed that particular line, because I like it when they start talking about the physicality of the people on the show. I think that it we've all had those kinds of conversations in real life, and I think especially in the beginning of a show, the writers don't have a whole lot of those lines written, because they haven't seen how the people are interacting and how they're vibing off of each other yet. But once they start seeing it, they start incorporating it, and I think that's cool.
I liked it too, because I noticed that as well. And then they cut from that to her kicking ass.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Sorry.
No, but as far as this idea of Buffy being part of this system, I think that Giles' reaction to it weighed more on me this time than when I was younger and saw it. When I was younger and saw it, I was probably in my mid-20s when I saw this originally. And I think that at the time I really, really felt for Buffy and really thought, oh, she's right, and blah blah blah. But this time seeing it, I think that as a 50-year-old guy, I really more relate to Giles, and I can really tell in this that he feels the weight of trying to be the mentor character on the show in this more poignantly than in any previous episode. I know that it gets bigger for him. I know that role gets bigger for him over the next few seasons, but in this particular episode, it's the first time that I've really seen him worried about Buffy as opposed to worried about the monster. Worried about what the monster is going to do to the community at large. And I think that's part of the reason that Buffy reacts the way that she does, is because she's never seen Giles really worried about her. Right. He has been, but I don't know that she has felt that yet.
Agreed. I think it's a really good, as you kind of introduced to us at the very beginning of this rewatch podcast, you said that these are all metaphors for teenage life, right? And I really saw it. Like, she doesn't know how much Giles worries about her, just like our kids really don't know. They don't really always see it. And she responds in a very teen way, but not an immature teen way, but still in a teen way. She's going to quit. I'm going to quit being the Slayer then.
And she does that by laughing at the system, and I thought that was a pretty poignant way to have Buffy find out that this was a problem.
And she throws the cross that Angel gave her on the ground. It's the Forever 21 cross, I call it. The dumbest. I mean, you could have done a better cross. I mean, it looks schlocky and cheap, but it's so like, this is like she's turning her back on the sacred call. Yeah. Which is, I mean, I have a lot of things to say about, because this episode in particular starts to play with all kinds of sacred imagery. But it's always with Whedon, who calls himself an atheist absurdist. I always find that Whedon cannot get outside of Christian theological terms. Yeah. He's using them or inverting them, right. but because I don't think that there is a sacral language that he can access that gets to the heft of what he's trying to do. But she tosses the cross down. It's not the only cross used in this episode. She tosses it down. She goes back home. She wants to get her mom to get out of Dodge for the weekend. Let's get away from the crisis, which is, right. One way to deal with anxiety is to avoid it, which does not actually help anxiety. It makes it worse, just as an aside. But Joyce tells her, that she got, her mom says, I got you this dress for the dance. And it's this lovely white dress. I don't know. Yeah, a lot of people made over the dress. Everyone had a comment on it, but I think quite clearly the symbol is on the nose. It's purity, and it's not so much a sexy prom dress. It's more of I would say it's more of a bridesmaid dress, but it's sort of baptismal.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is the point later, which we'll get to.
Oh, that's a great catch. You're right. Yep.
So next day, right? And Cordelia, by the way, starts having some really nice moments in this episode, right? Like less mean girl and more just sweet teen girl.
Yes. She asks, I don't know if this is the part of the episode or not. It's when she asks Willow to help her with something.
Yeah, her and Willow. So that's the next day. Cordelia and her were going to go to go ask AV club members for something, and they're watching cartoons, and they make a joke. I mean, to me, it was the least believable part of the episode because they never hung out together, but they're there. And this is what shocked me. The camera cuts they can see the back of the heads of people in a room in a cartoon. They don't see that there's blood on the TV, but then the camera cuts from the perspective of from like the wall where the TV is back out. And you see that I think 5 people I counted in the room were slunched over dead, killed by vampires.
Right.
And it was a relatively gruesome for network TV, I think, at that time. I mean, especially now living in the wake of so many school shootings, I actually thought it was a very alarming image to see inside of a school. Very
much. I don't think that the epidemic of school shootings had really begun at this point, though.
Oh, Paducah happened, and then Columbine's later on in 1999, the next spring after this. And you remember I told you I'm the same age as Buffy, so
clearly.
And that one would become what I consider there were several that happened, including the one at Paducah Bible Study, but it's the one in Littleton, Colorado that really becomes the primary big first one. So
I see.
April 20th, 1999.
Oh my gosh.
Hitler's birthday. I mean, there's so many weird things about April 20, but anyway, let's not go down those roads. So I think Buffy goes back to the library. I mean, Willow is actually expressing out loud, because of all this weird stuff's happening, that she's afraid the vampires are going to take over. I mean, we've now seen an earthquake, we've seen the pools of blood, or the sink of blood, and then all these kids in this room,
right?
Which they don't really address beyond that. Giles has now explained to Jenny Calendar about Buffy being the Slayer.
Yep.
Giles thinks he's just going to do it.
Yeah, he's going to go try to kill the Master himself.
Yeah.
So he take Buffy out of.
Yep.
And Xander decides he's going to do the same thing, and he goes to Angel for help.
He's the heart of the Scoobies. He's the beating heart, and as I've heard him described before, and sometimes he's very misguided. But he's full of vim and vinegar, and he wants to go help her out as well. I mean, no one wants to see Buffy get hurt.
Right. But Buffy has decided she has to face this responsibility. And Jenny says to her something to the effect of, if you go try to kill the Master, you'll die. And she says, well, maybe I'll take him with me.
That's right. It was sort of a moment of a possible, totally BA comment. And then I think what happens there, if you remember, she actually knocks Giles out.
Yes.
Tells Jenny Calendar, when he wakes up, tell him I said something really cool.
Yeah, that's right. And tell him I said it. That's right.
Which is awesome, because there's a lot of great one-liners all throughout Buffy, but it's also make something up.
Yeah, right.
She goes outside, and there's that little anointed one. I think his name's Colin, little kid. He's standing there creepily, and they just go hand in hand down to the candy shop. I mean, to the Hellmouth.
There's some really, really beautiful lighting in the shots. As she's approaching the Master, there are all these wonderful moments that are clearly. Do you know German Expressionism?
Well, yeah, I know a little bit about German Expressionism and how it influenced the Universal films of the early.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's a lot of that in there.
I love Nosferatu and some of those early silent vampire flicks.
My favorite one, the one that's had a big impression on me, was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, I own that. Yeah.
Yeah. I love how abstract all the sets are. I just think they're beautiful.
Yeah, I always tell people, a really great place to see some of that in American films is that early that James Whale Frankenstein films. Like, whenever you see the protagonists, they're all squarely framed.
Yeah.
In the shots, high ceilings and things. And then you go to the laboratory where Frankenstein's like losing his mind. There's spirally staircases.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Totally. All right. Buffy goes down and meets the Master. Here we go.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Xander is going to go get Angel, and he shows him a cross, and but pretty nobly is like, look, to me, you're just a vampire. But for some reason, Buffy thinks you're a person, which I love, because personhood is really the issue having to do with the vampiric absence of soul and soul in Buffy. And she's like, basically prove Buffy right. You need to prove her right. Let's go. And then they run off too, and they're going to go try to help out, whatever they're going to do. The Master is now having his great one-liner battle with Buffy. And he's if he feeds from her, that's going to free him. And in pretty short order, doesn't he? He just bites. I mean, it's kind of interesting how they do it. Like, he didn't drink long from Buffy, right? Isn't that right?
No, the Master has some sort of mesmeric quality, which you have mentioned in previous episodes, and yes, it's on Buffy, and so Buffy's just stuck there, and he bites her, and then he tosses her away like that's all he needed from her.
Yeah. And now she's in a pool of water, face down, in her white dress.
He says,
"Go ahead."
I love your dress.
Yeah. They all say it. Even Angel will say it later. Hey, I love your dress, by the way. I thought right away, this is the baptism moment for Buffy. She has been, if you're going to follow the Joseph Campbell hero of 1,000 faces, a call to adventure. Buffy's been called to adventure. She's met her mentor. She's met her foe. She's gone on these kind of archetypes.
She's denied the call and then decided she had to.
Yes, exactly. And this is that moment. Yep. And in terms of like Christian theology, she is like the baptismal symbol is the one of initiation. It's one of new birth. It's renewal, initiation, and entrance into a service. So Jesus actually is baptized right before his is like ministry, like that's like it's like enter into. And so she's down in the water and in the grave of the water of baptism, as we would say, the watery grave. Xander and finds Buffy, and there's a kind of ham-fisted sort of way to get Angel's like, I can't give her CPR, I don't have breath, you got to do it, right? So who's gonna mouth to mouth her, right? Meanwhile, you have the Master getting out, and you also have Jenny and Willow, or is it Cordelia? Yeah, no, it's a bunch of them, right? They're all surrounded. Like the vampires are coming out like The Walking Dead.
Right.
They're surrounding, like bad stuff's about to happen. So they lock themselves back in the library after being confronted in the parking lot. And then the campiness comes in because there is some sort of three-headed like monster.
Yeah, right.
Library.
Very, very, very styrofoamy.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of fun.
Yeah, agreed.
In there, is it only kind of a nod to the fact that the library is the thing on top of the Hellmouth? Because Jenny Calendar even brought it up. It's like they just keep bringing up, like, wait. Well, the Master is stuck in there, but do we know where in there is? And Giles is like, that's a good point. Like, they don't really know where the actual location of Hellmouth is. They just know it's Sunnydale, but this whole episode, they're kind of letting you know that it's under the library.
Right.
Yeah. So they're there. They're fighting off the three-headed monster. Mm-hmm. Buffy's been resuscitated now, or she's getting resuscitated, and then she gets up, and then she's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's like she's energized. Her calling is clear to her. Her she feels different. She says, "I feel different."
Renewed resolve, new energy. Yeah, and it's a real turning point, and she's basically, I mean, she's got a strut in her step. I mean, and it's pretty cool. And then they all kind of start walking off, and they're going to go, do their big bad final beatdown for the first season. Yeah. So what happens when they do fisticuffs?
Well, the Master grabs Buffy by the throat, and we think that he's going to bite her again, and he's doing his mesmeric thing, and she basically just blows him off and grabs him and tosses him across the rooftop.
How did you feel about that? He's holding her, mesmerizing happening. She looks out of her eyes to the left. The camera cuts to what's below them, and you can see a wood shard sticking right up.
Right.
cuts back. So it's meant to tell the visual story. What'd you say?
Forecasting, yes.
Yeah, the visual storytelling is telling you that's what's about to happen. But did it feel sort of schlocky to you or like extraneous? I mean, it just felt like it felt like a bit much to me when I was watching it. Like,
well, so it didn't feel like a bit much to me. What it actually felt like to me was it felt like a problem that we're going to see in future episodes of Buffy, which is we build up this conflict or this problem to where it's impossible to resolve. I'm reminded of the 7th season right now when we have the Uber Vamps or whatever, and then suddenly Buffy figures out how to deal with it, and then it's just easy. And I think that on one hand, I think that I've heard a lot of complaint about that from the fandom. Well, if this is such a terrible, monster, if the Master's so powerful, if the Uber Vamps are so powerful, whatever, then how is it that everyone's able to just like deal with them so easily after we get past the part in the writing where we've decided that they're no longer, scary anymore? And my response to that is, I think that's actually by design because of the metaphor. The reality of it is that in life, things look terrible and hard and impossible to deal with. And then what happens in most circumstances is we hit a turning point, and then the thing that we thought was hard just isn't.
Yeah.
And now,
or it's manageable.
Yeah. And now the problem is that I don't think that the metaphor is that clear in Buffy all the time. And I think that especially people who really get into the mythologized part of the actual monster story, it reads as kind of weird and fake to them.
I love that analysis that you did. I think it's pretty good. I feel like almost visually it was a weird like cut from one to
sure.
Felt like the distance. I mean, I don't know if it times up, but
I will. So I have been known to say many nice things about Whedon as a writer, and I still think that he's a genius of a writer, but a director, I think he was still finding his legs, and I don't know that he ever did find his legs. So I'm going to be mean here for a moment and tell you that from a visual storytelling perspective, Joss Whedon is not always, and the people around Joss Whedon, because he's showrunner and always the guy who's pulling the strings. I don't know that he really understands that element of it as strongly as he needed to. There was a lot of commentary about Whedon versus Snyder when the Justice League thing happened, because Snyder made the first version of Justice League, and then he left or got fired or whatever the story is, and Whedon came in and tried to put a Band-Aid on the Justice League project, and that ultimately led to the downfall of both of them, actually. But what I would say is this: I wish that they had just hired Whedon to write that script and then hired Snyder to make the movie Whedon wrote. As I think Whedon is a masterful writer and not a really good director. Meanwhile, I think that Snyder is an amazing cinematographer and not a good writer.
Okay. Well, there you go. I guess that's why we have teams and we all do this together.
Right. And I think that what you're describing is a great example of a time when Whedon or Whedon's team or whatever were making some sort of schlocky visual decisions because, whatever reason. It might be just that they felt that they needed to forecast this so people would understand why Buffy was tossing him through the window. And it might have also just been as straightforward as them knowing that she had to kill the Master and they didn't really have a great plan for it. But they had that really cool idea of, the bones of the Master after he lands on the spike being left over, despite the fact that we haven't seen the bones of any previous vampire on this show ever.
Which is what happened. Yeah, which is what happened. So she tosses him, and they land there, and then that's and you're exactly right. But it's funny how they handled it.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that.
There he is. He's dead there on the spike that's down in the bottom of the library, and the camera cuts away, and you see them, and then they all decide, and they don't, everyone gets dusted, but apparently because he's a really old vampire, maybe that's the why his bones are still there. But they decide that they're going to go back to life as normal and go to the Bronze to the prom.
Yeah, right.
Which is hilarious.
Let's party.
No one's worried about taking care of the bones. No one's worried about covering it up. No one's worried about any of that. And I thought the only way I could make sense of it is to go back to Alan's metaphor thing. Like, this is teen life. You go through like the thing. This is the end of the world, and then 5 minutes later, you can go back to hanging out with your best friend who just upset you so terribly.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And that I do think is what they're trying to say there. And I do think that that's the right way to make sense of Buffy all the time is to just keep that. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor.
Sure. And I think in terms of the spiritual philosophical stuff I talk about, I think it just is. I think it is a, what would have been termed at the time as postmodern. In a sense, I think like to mix symbols and stories and narratives to do something that serves their greater mythology, for whatever that is. So, there's a lot of Christian elements here with these crosses that you don't know why they have any meaning or value or efficacy. It's not sure that there's any other mainline religion that has any efficacy. There's a baptismal thing, but I just think it's all working on some cultural or symbolic way just to kind of connect with audiences. And ultimately, the real strength philosophically what the show is doing is talking about that hero's call to action and then overcoming those problems, which she did. I wanted to say that the way that the show handles concept of prophecy is it falls under the era of the prophetic understanding of most people. Prophecy does not mean predictive of the future.
Right. Tell me about this.
Well, I mean, the prophetic could have elements of prediction or whatnot, but a lot of time, like in Hebrew scriptures, what you get out of prophecy is like, if these things keep happening, if you keep doing this, this is what will happen. This is what God will do. It's less about like, let me give you the time and date of some, catastrophe that's already baked into the system of the universe that you can't get away from. That there's a weird mix of a deterministic fate. The Hebrew,
it's more like a Nostradamus prophecy than biblical prophecy, right?
Yeah. The Hebrew, the Judeo-Christian tradition, the Abrahamic faiths are not fate-oriented. In fact, in the world, in the Greco world of the time of the New Testament, the way comedy and tragedy would work is everything is kind of lives according to the balances of the universe or fate. And so if you overrode your station in life and reached too high, you had to pay, you had to die. And so I think a lot of Greeks maybe reading the story of Jesus and how Jesus stood against oppressive regimes or spoke truth to power or whatever. I think people might have seen him as a hero, and then but then also thought, oh, but he's got to die. And so by the time the cross, I think a lot of the a Greco-Roman mindset might have read that and got, well, of course he had to die. I mean, it's the tragedy, the fated tragedy built into the cosmos.
Sure.
It is the resurrection. It's the empty tomb that actually tips the scales, because it's all based on a balance of scales, and it's tips that, and it's completely this anathema. It's a scandal to the mind. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the way we talk and pattern our myths today, there's sometimes this desire to still reach out for kind of the fated realities, things that are just, it's really a great way to tell a horror or mystery story. It's like that there's some sort of force in the cosmos that has to work itself out these ways. But that's actually not how the prophetic tradition works within, let's say, the Judeo-Christian.
Sure.
Again, sometimes it could be saying you're speaking, the prophetic tradition there is more about speaking truth to power and critique. And
right.
You don't stop these really terribly unjust things. This is what's going to happen to you. The people will uprise, God will turn your back, whatever. And sometimes those things bore out, and that's where people thought, oh, this is predictive prophecy. Right. Sometimes people interpret events today backwards from prophetic texts, and so it makes it look like that there has been a fulfillment of something. So it works on a much deeper and much broader level than the way this text have it. But at the same time, the text reveals how prophecy is actually, or the show, and I called it a text because it is a text. The text of Buffy kind of shows us how a prophecy could be also done correctly. Everyone's reading the text thinking this is an inevitable fate.
Right.
But it really wasn't inevitable fate. She, quote unquote, died. I don't even know to what extent she actually died. We don't have the medical records of Buffy, but she actually didn't existentially die. She went through a transition. And so, no one accounted for that possibility. So it's interesting how it works in the show. And I don't think that most shows get prophecy, accurately, but
Sure.
I mean, I've even watched the recent Ghostbusters with my kids, and it drives me nuts that Ray Stantz has the word revelations with the S, tattooed on his arm. Why they can't just fact check and realize it's revelation? But like the prophecies there, it's like, well, this thing is said to happen, and therefore it will happen. And it's like, it's not exactly,
Not exactly how it works. That's amazing.
And in this text, they refer to a prophetic text in the Old Testament, and they do an upside down reading of it, the lion laying with the lamb and all that kind of stuff. The vampire reading is like basically this is where they get to come out and play amongst the innocent, but that's not what the text is about that they're quoting, right?
Right.
But I found that was very fun. That's a very fun, again, to do that, to kind of turn the world upside down, they can only enter into the sacred language of the Judeo-Christian tradition. They haven't entered into any other textual worlds.
Do you think that's specifically because they think that the audience will get it? It's like a shorthand, or do you think it's because they're ignorant of other possibilities, or what do you think's going on there?
Well, I think they do other possibilities later. They invest a lot in paganism. I just think it's less scary. I think it has less cultural panache even today. Mm-hmm. So I think culturally speaking, you can't escape certain elements of the Judeo-Christian tradition, even if it's like a perverse understanding of that tradition. It's there in the subtext of our culture. I mean, you can't read Shakespeare without having a certain understanding of the scripture, and so I think that sets the cultural table for those sorts of images, references, and things, and then it does have a spooky quality because it harkens back to old knowledge. I think it's harder when they insert all sorts of Wiccan and pagan things. Right.
Also because, with the exception of a couple of great Willow lines.
Oh, sure. But a lot of that, and I have an argument about a lot of that, the neo-pagan reconstruction makes it harder because there is not a direct line from today to some sort of ancient witchcraft. There's all these neo-pagans are reconstructing things and elements and readings, and so it's a synthesis. It's not a direct line, and so and then we don't have that cultural kind of agreed upon shared language or knowledge, so it makes it a little bit more distant.
Right. Okay, interesting. I like that. I think that's all fascinating. I do wonder, based on what you just asked, and you're the one wondering about this, but now you've got me curious. I wonder what the mythology of the show is, why the crosses have effect.
I just think that's cultural hangover. Like when you construct, I think I have a book over. I have the Encyclopedia of Vampires over here somewhere. And when you look at vampire studies, there's the folklore vampire, which is endlessly fascinating. Eastern European, Central European, and other sorts of vampire-like creatures. That's one sort of study. And then there's the aesthetic, cinematic, or literary vampire. Mm-hmm. And over time, those change. When I wrote on personalism in the Buffyverse and published on this, I talked about how Bram Stoker's Dracula, even though he was an Anglican, was much more Catholic because the host and the cross themselves have power in and of themselves. Later, Anne Rice, who became a Catholic later in life, or she came back to the church. I think she was an atheist when she wrote those. Hers is a more Protestant vampire because the crosses and churches had no threat to the vampires because if you didn't believe in them, they wouldn't have any effect, right? So in Protestantism, sacramentality isn't associated, the grace isn't associated with things like the host. It's about my belief in said thing, right? And then you go one step further to like a place like Buffy, and I doubt anybody utters the name of Jesus in the show, right? There is no, I mean, if the cross has power because of the Christian, the symbol, what it points to is Jesus, then if I'm Giles, I'm in church every week, right? I'm going. In fact, that's where my office might be. It's like I'm in a magic shop, right? So it follows more of a postmodern milieu where we're just mixing symbols, in at least postmodern aesthetics, right? We're mixing some symbols and stories and narratives together to create something a bit new and fresh. So I don't think it's as much about the cross itself as that, culturally speaking,
sure,
the cross signals something to people, holiness, whatever. Right. And so you go to a Halloween store and buy a plastic cross on Jake monk outfit, right?
Now, I'm certain you know way more about this than I do, so I'm going to ask this question. My understanding is that the cross didn't really become like the fixed symbol of Christianity until Constantine or somewhere thereabouts. And previous to that, it was more like a fish and an anchor or something to that effect.
Yeah, so I don't know when the cross became. I had to look that up. It wouldn't take long to discern some of that. But symbols evolve and change over time. And yes, the cross wasn't an immediate symbol, and you can imagine why. I mean, it was a symbol of execution. But yes, the fish definitely was. But there were others as well.
What I'm coming down to is we're going to have to write a vampire story where the vampires are killed by fish symbols.
That could be fun. Yeah. Which, I mean, another Christian symbol that people don't realize is like the unicorn is a Christian symbol.
Really? I had no idea. Tell me about this.
Oh, we don't have time today. But there is an argument, at least in certain translations of the Old Testament, unicorn is mentioned, right? But there's all kinds of translation reasons for that. But unicorn ends up becoming a symbol of Scotland, and one of the symbols of Scotland. And like there's a strength and fidelity thing. There's a text in the Old Testament. There's several different things about unicorns that end up becoming a Christian symbol. So I've got several books of Christian symbols and different cultures, different places in Europe, and kind of import that they get mixed up, and it's so fascinating. Symbolism and symbology is a fascinating thing for sure, but it really makes sense to me that these symbols have power, or holy water would have power if there's a sacramentality to it. That means that there's grace in it, not just as a symbol, not just as purely symbol pointing to meaning elsewhere, but that in itself it has value.
Right.
And you have some of that here, although they play with sacramentality from the vampiric perspective, and they toss around so much. I mean, it is spooky to hear vampires being religious, and I mean that just is a spooky thing. We've all seen spooky religious types that freak us out, right?
Yeah, sure.
So they just play. What they do is they play with sign and symbol for sure.
Yeah. All right, so this brings us to the end of Buffy season 1.
It is, and I will tell you that Vox ranked this one number 25 out of 144.
Really? Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, and they point out, Giles, I'm 16 years old. I don't want to die. And her voice cracking when she says that, and that added a lot to the show. So
that's great. That's great. Well, so season 2 coming up next episode. I'll tell you the things that I love about season 2, just so that we're forecasting here.
Where do we go?
Yeah, right. That's right. The three most important moments in season 2 for me, and I can't wait to get back to them, are the introduction of the new Slayer. Because Buffy died, so a new Slayer has been called.
Oh, yeah.
The second thing that I'm really looking forward to is Evil Angel. The metaphor of the teenager sleeping with the boyfriend, and the boyfriend changing and becoming someone else afterward. I mean, that's what that's all about, and I think that's brilliantly executed in this show. And then of course the third thing that I'm really looking forward to is the season finale of season 2. If it might be in my top 5 Buffy episodes, top 10 Buffy episodes for sure.
Okay. Well, I look forward to getting there with you and rewatching The Watchers. But is anyone watching us? I want to know.
That's right. Excellent. All right. Till next time, my friend.
See you. Bye-bye.